I was recently tasked by the team at Sandbox Interactive to take on their massive multiplayer online RPG, Albion Online, to see how much progress I could make in 30 days. I was up for the challenge, of course, but wanted to take things to the next level by seeing how much of their MMO I could actually play solo. And that's what I did. Over the past 30 days, I took on the massive world of Albion Online with nothing but my wits and my trusty donkey by my side, and the amount of content that can actually be soloed here is actually shocking. Huge thanks to Albion Online for sponsoring this video and letting me put their game to the test. And if you like what you see here, you can use my link down below in the description or the pinned comment to sign up completely for free and start your own adventure right now. Alright, so as any good MMO does, day one typically starts with character customization. Albion definitely has its own unique art style here, though there is actually a fair amount of detail and character options that you can choose from. But just browsing through both the male and female, I decided to stick with male here so I don't distract myself. But for facial options, I decided to go with a bit more rugged approach, longer hair, and of course, some facial hair to round out the appearance. And apparently you can customize your underwear too, so why not? And I was happy to see that the name Hack the Minotaur was still available, so I could jump right into the game. Then on the starter island, I began with some basic gathering of materials, which was super easy. This let me craft a basic sword, for example, where I could pick skills like Heroic Slash to start defending the island from heretics. I also quickly earned my first mastery level and took a look at the Destiny board, which is essentially a way to purchase skill upgrades for pretty much every skill in the game by the looks of it. Quickly on, I discovered my first settlement with actual real players. Hello. And I bought my first mount for a measly 3 silver pieces. And that did a bunch of other basic quests that taught me more about crafting and about resource gathering in Albion. On day 2, I finished crafting all the basics, I got all my necessary tools, and was then told I needed to upgrade my gear to tier 2. But I was also given the option to either craft the gear myself or simply buy it from the marketplace. Seeing as I had a good amount of silver already, I decided to buy that new gear to save some time. Unfortunately, I did run out of silver eventually and didn't have enough left for a weapon, so I decided to gather materials to craft myself a bow. I went out to fell more trees, but the logs also needed to be refined, which I did that back in town, then brought those over to the Hunter's Lodge to craft the bow myself. This let me actually pick more abilities, and I decided on the multi-shot skill, since this comes with a knockback, which seems like a smart choice. I don't know, we'll see. But I couldn't wait to try this out, so I went back into the wilderness hunting heretics. Overall, the combo seems pretty strong, but I'll need to work on my combat skills just a little bit more still. On day 3, I returned to the starter camp and found a new quest. The heretic fort in the nearby mountains needed defeating, which I was glad to do to improve my bow skills even more and test out some of my new armor. Fully decked out in tier 2 gear now, my arrows downed enemies pretty quickly, though I still took a good chunk of damage. Basically, I needed to work on dodging more effectively because I kept getting stuck in the red and taking a lot of extra damage that I really didn't need to. But I ended up defeating those heretics anyways, sounded the horn, and found out it was time to leave the starter island on my first real adventure to the mainland. Day 4, I landed in a destination of my choosing. I went to Forest Cross with the mindset of being a ranger, I guess, because I had already crafted my first bow. The city was much bigger than anything I had seen so far in Albion, and I quickly found many quests by speaking to the royal commander. I also got my first taste of a solo expedition, which is basically crawling a dungeon, defeating groups of enemies, and earning a little bit of silver and treasure. A whip-wielding dungeon boss called the Overseer didn't actually give me much of a challenge at this point. And I also unlocked the ability to do group and even hardcore dungeons in the future if I wanted to. On day 5, I took a breather from combat and walked around Forest Cross to learn where each of the merchants was. And there was actually a quest to do this, which was super helpful in getting my bearings on this new city. From there, I had apparently completed the full tutorial, and was then given my next mission to upgrade my gear to tier 3, and also take on my first open world dungeon in the next zone over. One thing I started to notice here was that I couldn't just equip gear in a higher level tier anymore after I bought it. I actually needed a high enough skill from the Destiny board, which would unlock by wearing the same type of armor in a lower tier. Basically, this meant that to use higher level items, I would need to level up the skill line first, which I hadn't really been doing. That was fine because my gear skills leveled up fairly quickly just from basic combat anyway. And I also discovered I could use learning points, which is something you get from questing to level up the next skill tier much faster. And while I was out gathering more materials for crafting, I came across a solo dungeon in the world which was a lot more challenging than that first expedition I had done back in Forest Cross. I think I may have been a bit under geared for this one. It took me several tries, in fact, to beat the final boss of the dungeon, but I basically just needed to work on the boss mechanics and how to deal damage more effectively. So this was actually a decent challenge, plus I got some great loot at the end of this, which made me want to discover more random dungeons out in the world. On day 6 through 7, I noticed that I was harvesting trees pretty slowly, and also that I couldn't harvest higher level trees, which I would need to do if I was going to upgrade my bow again. So I realized I needed to upgrade those tools. This was actually easy to do in town because I already had the right materials for the next set of tools I needed, and it made harvesting so much faster. It was kind of insane. So after refining lots of planks and also crafting a few lower level bows to level up my skills, I was finally able to craft a tier 3 journeyman's bow, which was a nice upgrade for what I had equipped currently. I was also finally ready to tackle that quest dungeon from earlier, which I was able to find in the nearby zone of Red Lake. With that upgraded bow, these enemies fell down way quicker, even though they were higher level, so I was clearly doing something right. By day 10, I felt confident enough to start leaving the starting zone and head to my first major in-game city called Limhurst. This location was literally flooded with players and had tons of shops and merchants to explore as well. I could now do higher level expeditions if I wanted to. Apparently you can also buy an island in this game, which I had no idea about, but I will definitely go check that out later on. I also visited the arena, which gave an overview of the game's seasons system, and also showcased previous season winners, which was actually pretty nice. Apparently you can get your own statue in Albion with your high score listed, which is pretty impressive. I even stumbled into a practice PvP arena, which I definitely needed to return to eventually to work on my PvP skills, but I passed on through for now. By day 12, I was ready to take on a real dungeon. This was Heretic Keep, and it was designed for parties of at least 2 players, so I was a bit nervous when it came to going solo, but I also felt pretty confident in my gear and my build by this time, so I decided to give it a try. The basic quest which brought me here required killing at least 12 heretics in the Keep's cellar, and the enemies here were definitely much harder than anything I had faced before. I did pretty well, but that was harder to do based on how everything was grouped up. Eventually though, I was able to conquer the cellar, reap my rewards, and also upgrade my gear, improving my cape and my pack for more speed and carry weight. By day 15, it was finally time to start upgrading my mount. Several options for this exist in Albion Online, including oxes for more storage weight, but I wanted something fast, so I went with the Journeyman's Riding Horse, which would give me more riding speed along with increased galloping speed for open roads and fields to move a lot faster. And now I could actually expand my route, which I did by visiting some higher level zones nearby. To the west, in the zone of Ferndale, I ran smack into a huge PvP battle that I wasn't flagged up for at the time, so I didn't die or take damage, but I did see literally hundreds of players participating, so this was definitely something I was going to come back for once I was a bit higher level. I also worked through my quest log, clearing new solo expeditions and dungeons, facing off against challenging new monsters and bosses, and with all the silver I got, was able to upgrade again, this time getting a tier 4 cowl that gave me an AoE shout to push enemies back, which was great for my archer setup when enemies got too close. By day 17, the wars in Ferndale had stopped and I was able to fully explore the zone. Apparently I'd completely skipped over the tier 3 zones because these enemies were now tier 4 and hit much harder. The new defensive shout I picked up earlier was a huge help here. I also found a tier 4 dungeon, which was exactly what I needed to complete my latest quest, but the elementals and bears were extremely hard hitting and knocked me around constantly. I found a giant mini boss which seemed optional and way too hard for me at the time, so I just ran away and kept going deeper into the caves. The final boss here was a great fight though, breaking my armor along the way, but I eventually took them down to complete that first tier 4 dungeon, and I'd need to go back into town to repair right away. By day 20, I had fully recovered and repaired or upgraded my gear, leveling up my cloth armor, medium armor, and bow skills in the process. Then I decided to push further south into the desert biome, which I hadn't touched yet, and it was far away, but also led to higher level zones, so it seemed like a good direction to try. As has been the case though throughout my entire experience with this game, I got distracted by something else along the way, in this case a corrupted dungeon. Apparently these can have PvP, but it is random, and my gear score was just high enough to enter, so I thought it was worth the risk. In these corrupted dungeons, you can get invaded by other players, and you're also supposed to eliminate enemies here to build up corruption and summon the final boss. So it's a bit of a PvE/VP experience, which is awesome. I didn't get invaded this time, but it was still a huge challenge as the enemies here hit very hard, and there are also a variety of lava traps to watch out for. Eventually, though, I killed enough enemies to summon that final boss for an epic battle. And though I didn't think I would survive due to all the mechanics it threw at me, I eventually beat him on my second try, which was awesome. So I decided to grab my loot and get out, because even though you can continue further and further into corruption, your chances of getting invaded also increase. So I decided to head out after round 1. By day 23, I'd fully transitioned into the deeper desert zone, searching for greater challenges and treasure along the way. Speaking of which, I came across a group of giants guarding a map, which eventually led me to a solo dungeon guarded by a tough druid boss who threw lightning bolts. I genuinely did not think I would survive this encounter because he did so much damage to me, even with those basic attacks, but by learning his patterns, I eventually defeated the boss on my 3rd or 4th attempt, capping off a very challenging solo dungeon encounter. From days 25 to 30, I finally decided it was time to try my hand at some PvP. I thought my gear was strong enough at this point, but I still wanted to invest in some consumables, so I grabbed a ton of potions from the market first. Now, there are many different ways you can PvP in Albion Online, from solo to groups, overland to instance-based, but I decided to try one of the most basic first, which was queuing up for the arena. Now, you can queue up here as a solo player, even though it is technically group content, which is nice and pretty easy to get started with. And once I got in, I basically had no idea what I was doing, so I just followed my group, dealt damage where I could, and tried to help by completing the objective here, which is to capture rune stones to score points and reduce the enemy team's points. For my first match, I actually did not die once. I mean, the potions that I got definitely helped, but my healer helped a lot more. Of course, I didn't get a lot of kills being a beginner, but I did get a ton of assists here and did some decent damage for my first attempt, so overall I was pretty happy. And during these last few days, I continued to practice my PvP skills in different formats, from those instance arenas to outpost and faction warfare, which leads me to Albion's brand new update called the Abyssal Depths. In this update, they've made PvP content more approachable for new players. Now, that's because in every city there is a new Antiquarian's Den, where players can easily access a variety of PvP content, including Abyssal Depths, Hellgates, and Corrupted Dungeons. The Abyssal Depths features partial inventory loot, meaning players can only lose what they find inside, not what they bring in, and it also introduces an exciting new escape mechanic where these dungeons eventually close, killing any players that don't escape in time. By participating, players can earn exclusive rewards, including special mounts, Cape Vanity skins, and hell-themed avatar items. But even outside of PvP, there's so much you can do in this game. I kept finding myself returning to the game's exploration, leveling, and crafting systems, which seemed nearly endless and offered tons of surprising and interesting things to do and paths to upgrade your character. I really enjoyed how there were no forced quests, no rigid objectives here. You could simply create your own story through whatever style of gameplay that you wanted. And while I chose to challenge myself to solo as much as I possibly could, I was also surprised by how large and active the game's player base is, and there's always things going on that you can participate in, from group dungeons to faction warfare and of course PvP. Albion Online has even improved their new user experience, providing new players with better guidance and clearer goals, at the same time giving a more direct view into the most fun and exciting parts of the game. So I had no trouble at all stepping into this world, even though it was my first time. And to start your adventure, just use my link down below in the description and the pinned comment. And thanks again to Albion Online for sponsoring this video.